I'll skip over the introductory slides. They're in your packs. But just to introduce the firm, it was created last year by a merger of IHS and Market, and we've imaginatively called it IHS Market. But it really brings together data from not only financial markets, but from all the key sectors of the economy, and we think we're in a good place to be able to improve kind of systems and data that we're discussing today. So there's been some discussion of definitions already, and I've taken the definition from the FCA website, which Nick didn't use. But I mean, really, we would see, I don't want to spend too much time defining it because you start to define what it isn't. But we would see it as processes that help with workflow, connectivity, and analysis, often through shared services. I think it's important to say that it doesn't replace due diligence. It's not making regulatory decisions. It's really a tool to allow these to be done better. And I think sometimes it's considered that it's going to be doing the compliance, where actually it's a tool. The advantages, I think the most obvious advantage is that it reduces repetition in the economy. So a lot of the processes of regulation are repetitive. You've got the same activities taking place over and over again in various companies with the various users of the financial markets as well. And by bringing this together, you can share it. That reduces the burden on the economy generally. I think for regulators, it allows them, in the development of such services, you get consistent and higher standards. For a regulator, these are auditable. You can compare what different firms are doing. You can do thematic reviews. I think it's very, very helpful for regulators. They're scalable solutions, so it's easier if you don't come to market very often. You don't have such a hurdle. If you're a new firm, you don't have such a hurdle of complying. That is actually a barrier to entry. I think it's been fairly well discussed. I think the overall message is this is a way of actually reducing regulatory burden without diluting the standards. I mean, I worked at the FSA during the crisis, and I think there would be a lot of concern if we go down the route of trying to reduce the level of regulation. And I've left the quote in to say that it's not necessarily something new. Leibniz in 1685 tackling a similar question. So I've included this slide because actually I think this is important for regulators in that there's a well-discussed regulatory cycle. You have poor regulation leading to risks building up in the economy. Then there's a financial crisis. Then there's, generally speaking, an over-regulation of risks that have already crystallized. Then this leads to a burden on the economy, which then leads to lower growth and pressure to reduce regulation. And actually, I think we should see RegTech in terms of, I won't stand here and say this time it's different because that's what everybody says during the good times. But it is a tool where you can reduce burden without reducing the level of regulation. So just to introduce some of the RegTech products that we do, this is not an exhaustive list. So we have this, if you look at the top of the top line, these are tools to help process. They all run off Market Counterparty Manager. That's like an app store of RegTech. There are other things like ISDA Amend run off that. We have a sort of successful KYC product. We're developing a Know Your Third Party product. We have a very successful tax product. And they basically, as I said, they share the process, centralize the services. The middle line is where we think we offer a kind of best practice solution to meeting regulatory needs. For example, we will be doing transaction reporting for MiFID. We do it for EMIR. This is sort of allowing people to get best practice without massive investment. And the final line, on the first two on the left-hand side, these are data aggregation services, so that the tools allow you to make better decisions because it allows firms to look across the market as opposed to simply the data they have themselves. And then we also do robo-advice, and we're piloting blockchain. So I've highlighted what I think are, from our experience, 5 interconnected barriers to RegTech taking off. So, as has already been said, the lack of clarity from regulators is a real problem in terms of growing this area of business. Firms are very unclear what's acceptable, and I think it's important to remember that firms will not invest in RegTech if they have to keep all the processes in-house as well. And we think regulators could be far clearer in terms about RegTech is an acceptable way of doing things. It's also difficult, so as a non-regulated firm, it's sometimes difficult when you're developing products to actually go and speak to the regulator because you don't have a formal relationship with them. And so, I think it would help the regulator if we could come in and understand what they wanted. And also, even when you have the services going, so for example, if we do reporting services and there's a problem with the reporting, we would find it easier if we could just tell the regulator as opposed to relying on our clients to pass those messages on. Similarly, there is a real lack of clarity in the outsourcing space, data, privacy laws. The way that they're applied, it's very inconsistent, even around the EU, let alone around the world. And whatever the regulator can do to give more clarity as to exactly what's required would be really, really helpful. In terms of the regulation itself, there are some poorly drafted parts of regulation that lead to either the standards are too aggressive, too ambitious, and it means that people are afraid to experiment. They just sort of try, they rely on legacy systems. It's too dangerous to change it. Or that, for example, subject close to my heart is access in MiFID. It's to break down silos and allow interconnectivity. But actually, the requirements are for, say, trading venues and CCPs. They're not for their agents or for the technology providers, and that actually is quite difficult for us in terms of, of actually fulfilling those requirements. And then I think the final box, or the final circle, is sometimes users don't want to deal with RegTech providers. And actually this can cause, so for example, if it's a KYC product, users may say, look, we're not going to do this. And then you get a unwinding of the higher standards as people compete. Because if you do it for a key client, you give them a different system, other people will come in and start to unwind the service. Okay. So what do we actually want? Well, I think there's things the authorities can do, and there's things in the regulatory framework. Firstly, I was glad to hear that people are generally technology neutral, but regulators should avoid picking winners. And actually, even though I think the UK's Project Innovate is an excellent initiative, there is a kind of feeling that you have to have some sort of really cutting-edge technology to be able to go and talk to the regulator. And sometimes these systems are not necessarily the height of new technology. They are an innovative application of existing technology. And I think the regulators should remember that and say not pick winners. It would be good if there was a point of contact for RegTech providers within the regulator so that dialogue could be had, as I said, in the design phase and in the application phase if you want to report problems or discuss how the service is working. Something a bit more formal would be very helpful. I would like to see, I mean, Nick's all said that the regulator could be clearer, but I think it would be nice if we had much more from the regulator saying firms need to be looking at RegTech, or they can look at RegTech. This is an acceptable way of meeting some of the requirements or the tools that you can use. And you know, perhaps speeches, and actually sometimes even our clients say anecdotally that different people from the regulator have a different attitude to some of this technology. So one supervisor may be saying, yes, this looks very good. The next person they meet is much more worried, and there seems to be a lack of consistency even in the message internally, and that we would like to see something done about that. I think it would help a lot if the regulator could certify or endorse products. I know that's very difficult for the regulator, and Nick has said that they won't be doing that, but there really needs to be ways of communicating whether a certain service is acceptable or not. I think that would help the take-up of RegTech. In terms of the framework, there are lots of reviews. There's still a lot of regulation to come through, particularly on the level 2. And it would just be helpful if these regulations were drafted in a way that did consider the use of RegTech. So things like the access problem, those kind of things could be very quickly ironed out, I think. And there are other, and I'm very, very happy to talk about it in the panel, but there are other examples where the lack of clarity or what seems to be too onerous is pushing RegTech providers out. There's been some discussion about outsourcing cybersecurity. You know, I think just bearing in mind the problems that can cause would be helpful. And then just tools to get people to use what would be industry standards and not refuse to be involved in them. And I'll leave it there.